Hello and welcome back to Retro Island Diskettes for another conversation with an influential figure in the retro computer world. And today's guest is here by your request.
That's right, Neil. The works of composer Format are regularly chosen on this podcast, and for good reason. Format, AKA Matthew Simmonds, has stretched the musical capabilities of our favourite systems to the limits in both the demo scene and on commercial projects from the 80s through to the present day.
We're really excited to have him on the show today. So excited, in fact, we've got a guest host joining us. It's Ravi Abbot from the 8-Bit Mix Show.
Hello, how are you doing, guys?
Matthew, Ravi, welcome to the show and thank you for joining us. To kick off the conversation, why don't you introduce your first track and let us know why you've chosen it?
So my first track is Jethro Walrus by the Mighty Bogg. This was one of the first tunes I heard from the old CompuNet scene on the Commodore 64.
This track takes us back to 1986 when the Mighty Bogg released two SID music albums via CompuNet. And as you explained, it made its way onto cassette tape and gave you your first ever taste of a fledgling demo scene. Can you remember your reaction to discovering this scene?
Yeah. So actually, the first tracks I heard were also by the Mighty Bogg as well, but they were like covers of popular songs. So I was given those on tape by a friend of my dad, and it was just amazing to hear like music that wasn't in a game, because up to that point, all I'd heard was things like Tales of the Arabian Nights and so on. So it's just in the background of the game you're playing.
When you say you were given them on tape, were they in an audio format or were they to load up onto your Commodore 64?
They were to load up on the machine. But
so you were a Commodore 64 owner first, were you?
Yeah. My parents had bought me one. When would it have been? 1984, I think. So just when they were coming out, pretty much. Because I was going to get a VIC-20. That's what I really wanted. But that had come out, in the interim, and they bought that, luckily.
So were you aware of the audio capabilities of the C64 when you chose it? Because as a musician, it seems odd that you were considering the VIC-20, or did music and computers just not go together for you at that time?
At that time I had no musical aspirations at all, so I knew nothing about the machine.
So no formal music training or any experience with any instruments at all at that point?
No, pretty much no. It was... So I was only 10 at the time. That would have been at 84, yeah.
Were there many musicians on the kind of CompuNet scene at the time?
Actually, a lot of the commercial ones were on there, like Rob Hubbard and David Whittaker. They were putting up little demos, and Ben and Rat as well, Anthony Krauser.
Did you find they were accessible to contact and chat to, or did you not try and approach them?
Oh, no, I didn't really. See... After I had, one of my friends was on there and he was talking to people, but I got a modem in, would have been 86, because of the Zap articles, the Zap magazine. And there was a lot of, every month they'd have a few demos in there. So I managed to get hold of a modem, and I only had a tape drive. So I'd have an hour a week, I think it was, just to try and download as much as I could and then get back off the phone line. So,
Mum, put down the phone.
Yeah, and the thing is, with the tape drive, it was the old slow loader, so it's literally just waiting 20 minutes for something to save or whatever.
So you're known for breaking into the scene with your work on the Amiga around 1989. So how much experimentation did you have with music making on the C64?
It was... I don't know. It's a reasonable amount, I think. I mean, my friend who was into the demo scene and stuff, he gave me a couple of music packages to try out because he wanted some music for his demos. I don't think we ever actually got anything into a demo, but I tried a few different tools out. So I used to use Ubix Music, which was that one that came out from Firebird, I think, for £2 or £3. So I did some stuff on that. I did some stuff on Master Composer, which was the same one that Mighty Bogg used for his stuff. That was I tried to go back to that recently just to have a look at it, and God, I don't know how I ever got past that interface or anything. so yeah, I had bits and pieces. As I said, I've got no formal training in any of this stuff, so yeah.
And just thinking back to those early experiments, can you remember when you got to the point when you actually finished or thought you'd completed a track? And can you remember, is it something that you'd be willing to share with the world, or was it quite a basic composition?
I think they were all pretty basic. I used to do covers of things as well, but I've got nothing from that era at all.
Okay.
And do you remember when Ultimate Tracker came out and Ultimate Sound Tracker came out, and how much did that change your kind of way of making music?
Yeah, so I got an Amiga right for Christmas 1988, so the tracker and everything had been out, and it was the same friend who'd done 64 stuff. He'd moved up to the Amiga and showed me a few demos on there, and that was what got me to buy an Amiga rather than an ST. It was just because the quality of the sound and the visuals and everything, it just seemed like a whole other level sort of thing. So he gave me, which one did I have? I used to have Master Sound Tracker, which was one of the ones that the demo crews sort of modified, I think. So he gave me that for when I got my machine, and ST01, which was the old sample disc. And basically it was just like, go off and try and write some stuff.
Yeah, I've got Andrew next to me shaking his fist at me. It's hard to get through most of these episodes without the old Amiga Atari argument coming out.
Yeah, I don't know. I had an Atari ST as well, like probably a year later, and I was doing music for games after that, so I had to have both.
Don't worry, there's a question later on that I'm going to ask Matt.
Okay. We'll come on to those later years, the Amiga years soon, but we'll just sort of stick with the C64 for now. Aside from Graham Bogg, who were your musical inspirations during these early C64 years? And away from the computers, who were you listening to on your Walkman?
I'd imagine from this SID stuff, it's obviously going to be Rob Hubbard, Martin Galway, Tim Follin, guys like that, really, because pretty much everybody was. But there were some demo scene ones as well. There's a few of those. What I would have been listening to back then, probably Talking Heads. I think they were a big inspiration for me.
Okay, Matt, why don't you introduce your next tune and tell us why you chose it?
Okay, this is another track off CompuNet. It's by Neil Baldwin, who was known as Demon then, and it's just got the title Demons First. I think it was the first track he put onto CompuNet. So I saw this in one of the Zap articles, and they were sort of raving about it on there, and I downloaded it, and it's really, really good.
Neil Baldwin then was a very accomplished composer who worked at Eurocom and wrote all of the music for their NES games. He also wrote a tracker that emulates the NES sound chip. We hear a lot of stories about composers having to be part programmer and part composer to squeeze the best out of those older systems. Did you have to teach yourself to program to advance your music at all, Matt?
Well, with like the Amiga stuff, no, I didn't do any coding. I used to commission people to write drivers and things, though, for certain stuff. And after that, I was pretty much in-house for most of my career. So like when the consoles came in, at that time, you pretty much had to go in-house if you wanted to do any work for them. So at that point, we had like dedicated coders coding all the drivers and stuff. But when I came back to the demo scene in the late 90s, I made a point of learning 6502. So I've pretty much made loads of like my own music drivers and players and stuff after that point. I was sort of catching up.
What difference did that make for you? You know, what could you do that you couldn't have done before as a composer, having written the software yourself?
I think there's a lot of things. It's not just like interface stuff. It's just the thing with a lot of the 64 music I find is that the drivers, the specific drivers that people have with the composers used, actually give the music its own style as well. I mean, there's certain things in Rob Hubbard's driver when I've gone back and looked, sort of disassembled it and had a look in there. It's like you can see why some of the music sounds like it does or does certain stuff at certain points, because the driver kind of either needs it to happen or benefits from it happening that way, sort of stuff. So I think I think I've mentioned this before in an article or something, but it's like there's like a symbiosis between the actual driver and the composer. On the Amiga, I had one of the demo coders in Anarchy was coding a music like a variant of one of the trackers, but it had its own driver and setup underneath and stuff like that, and it had like specific chip waveform playback and stuff like that in it. So I bought that off him. And the playback driver, which was really, really super fast as well. So, but it also compressed the patterns, which are, if you remember with modules, they were always a fixed sort of size in the file. But this one actually compressed them down a bit, so that was quite good.
Were you a member of the demo scene in the Commodore 64 era?
No, I was very much someone that just downloaded and was like enthusiastic about it. It was. I think at that time there was nothing I had really to offer at all, musically or otherwise.
Which was the first tune then that you ever tried to distribute and get out there? Can you remember?
Yeah, I mean, that would be the Amiga stuff, but that went through my friend who knew someone in the demo group Slipstream at the time. So I'd given him some tracks to just listen to or something, and he'd passed them on to this guy, and this guy said, "Oh, we're looking for a composer. Does he want to join," sort of thing.
Slipstream then was the first group that you joined?
Yeah. So I was in them for most of 1989, I think, pretty much. So, but it would have been like March to November or something. I don't know. It's not a long time ago.
And then you had a conversation, I believe, with Judge Drock. He described a telephone call that he made to you.
Yeah.
And we'll come on to that shortly because we're going to move into the Amiga years, I think, from track 3 onwards. So would you like to introduce your next track to take us into that period?
Yeah, so this one's AXK22. It's by a guy called AXK who I don't really know anything about, really. But this is one of those tracks I remember from the sort of 89, 90 era, before all the design stuff and the more synth-led stuff came in, that was really super dynamic. And for some reason it stuck with me, and it took me ages to find it, but this is this track.
What led you to prefer the Amiga? Because there was Cubase and there was some really good programs for the ST.
Yeah, there were, but the problem was if you had those, you had to buy a synth or something like that, and I just didn't have the money for any of that. And one of the things I liked about the Amiga, and I think a lot of people did, was that it was like, it's a 4-channel sampler that's in a computer that doesn't cost very much, or at least it can be a main Christmas present for that year. And, you've got all this power that you can work with.
How different was it moving from the kind of, making waveforms before to being able to use samples?
Well, the funny thing is, I did some sampled stuff, but I also was trying to work out a way of doing chip music stuff in modules. So I used the the really small waveform looping stuff and worked in different techniques for that for quite a while. So I kind of kept my my sort of obsession with SID music in there somehow.
But you are credited with having created the first chip tunes on the Amiga, which helped you, I guess, to forge your own style and make that Amiga sing in ways that other people hadn't heard before.
I might be credited somewhere, but nobody knows that. It's like nobody knows for certain who did it first. Really, it's one of those things where there's a guy called, I don't know if you heard of Go280. He's a musician, does Amiga and other formats and stuff. But he runs a site called, I think it's Chip Flip, and they look into the history of all different chip styles and chip music and where it came from and stuff like that. And he's the one that's really still looking and hasn't found a definite answer on it.
Right. So there were several composers trying to achieve that result at the same time. And why do you think that was? Was it just because of the precedent set by the SID chip and trying to replicate that way of making music? Why did people want to create this style on the Amiga?
Yeah, I think there's two things. I think the first one's exactly what you said. Is like a lot of the Amiga. If you look at some of the demos and things, a lot of the Amiga guys came over directly from the 64, and some of them were covering Rob Hubbard or Martin Galway tracks and other things like that. But also there were several players on the Amiga, like I wrote these down actually, like Suntronics and remember the Hybris music and stuff like that. That were very specifically sounding like chip music, like proper chip music. So I think there was a mixture of that as well. And also it's the size thing with these files. It's like if you're making a tiny intro or something like that, and you've got a module in there that packs down to like 2K or something, then it's all good.
Well, we mentioned Judge Drock a little bit earlier. So you were a member of Slipstream, or was your music just distributed through Slipstream because you put that track forward?
No, I was actually a proper member. I think we did. The thing was, back in '89, I would write probably 5 or 6 tracks in a week and just send them off at the end of the week.
Sure.
And I wouldn't know what demos they were going into or if they were going to be used on anything. It was just like, it's one of those things where, when you're really enthusiastic about something and you're young, it's like you just do loads and loads of stuff. So
just machine gunning out all of these tracks and seeing what happens.
Exactly. It was that doesn't happen anymore, unfortunately. But at the time, it was just like that for me. I didn't really know, and I think with that era of stuff, we didn't really make things for stuff. If you see what I mean, we didn't make specific tunes for demos. It was just, we've got a musician. He just sends me stuff, and I put them in things I'm making. That kind of thing.
Well, some of that music obviously was sticking and making an impression, because Judge Drock, Mark, was very keen to make you a member of his Anarchy group, and also quite surprised that you said yes when he phoned you and asked you to join. Can you remember that phone conversation and how it went?
I can't remember the phone call. I know obviously it happened, but it's one of those things. I can remember the feeling though. It was just that it felt like there was time for a change. I think really and they were, especially with some of their coding and stuff like that they had coming up. It was like a very promising group, and they were very they were fully just demo scene fixated. They weren't doing anything else, which has always been the part of it I've been interested in. So that was probably it, I think.
I've always wondered, what were the kind of perks that you got being a member of the demo scene, or was it just for the street cred,
I don't know. I mean, the thing that I like about the demo scene is simply just making demos or watching demos. It's never been anything else for me, even back then, and I occasionally do stuff now, and it's the same thing. It's like I'm not really interested in demo parties or any of the other stuff. It is just the creation of things that I enjoy, really.
So did you find when you transitioned to Anarchy that you were able to work more closely with the sort of the developers, or were you still just mashing together your tunes with their code?
Yeah, I think in that era, so that would have been 1990. The demos were starting to get a bit more coherence to them. They weren't quite there yet. They weren't quite in the design phase that was a few years later. But I think I do remember occasional phone calls where it would be, Michael's making this demo and we're going to have a specific tune for it. And so, I go off and write something like Phantasmagoria, I remember, was that was one where I wrote that and another track, I think it was Cluster, in the same weekend, because they were releasing 2 demos at the same party. And so we specifically had tracks there that were for those.
Can you remember any of the sort of design language you would have used? So if they wanted a sort of a very fast, exciting track, or
to be honest, that still in that era, I don't think there was much of that at all, because I remember things like what was the Madness demo, the first one. The only design language we had was that the tune wasn't long enough and they needed to extend it a bit. so like the last 2 minutes of that were done in like half an hour or something like that. So there's a definite quality gap as it drops. That lead solo at the end, that's the bit where it's just like, oh god, I've got to just fill this out.
Okay, for the next track, you've picked Oppenheimer by Bruno. Tell us more about this track.
Yeah, okay, so this would have been 91, I think, is the first time I heard some of Bruno's stuff. He was an amazing musician. He was doing stuff in styles that I don't think anybody was doing at the time. It was like a lot of the music was synth-based, but he was just bringing instruments and styles from everywhere.
Matt, it wasn't long before your talents were noticed by commercial software houses and you're working on titles such as Chuck Rock. Did these houses approach you or did you apply to them? How did you get your foot in the door?
I think I had been sending tracks off, but I'd got nothing back positive, really, at the time. So that would have been 1990, I think, when I would I was just finishing school, so it's like, well, maybe I can do some, game music, maybe. But then out of the blue, someone asked if they could use one of my tracks in a game, which was Shockwave. It's like a into the screen 3D game. It's not particularly well known, but so I had one of my tracks in there on the title screen, and it sort of just went from there, really.
So when you're just leaving school, it's that time when you're thinking ahead to what careers you might choose. Was making music on computers your number one choice for a career? Or, did you believe that could happen? And did you have another career choice in mind if it didn't?
I didn't have another career choice in mind, no. But the thing was, it was like, this is, this probably won't happen at the time. So I went off to college and I did some random computer course. It wasn't like a science computer course. I can't remember what it was, really. But I was only there for like 3 months, and then I got more game work coming in, and I decided to sort of jump out of that. So it was Shockwave, then Carve Up for core design, then Chuck Rock, and then I did another one called War something or other. It was like a sort of Ikari Warriors one. Did
the design briefs change? Did you get better descriptions of what you had to create, or was it still completely random?
Sometimes you get a demo of what they're working on. Sometimes you get a tape. If it was an arcade, because arcade conversions were still a thing then. So sometimes you just get a tape through the post, and they go convert all these. So it's. If you were lucky, it depended where the people were, because I was working freelance, but sometimes you could actually go up there and play the arcade game and have and have a look at it and see what you're actually working on. So that was good. But it's this is like the early 90s era of game development before consoles, so there still wasn't 100% lots of design work or anything sent out, but it was all right, I think.
So Matt, was you're beginning your career now, and you're working your way through various games and various companies. Can you remember some of the more sort of highlights from that period?
I mean, so when I was starting, I was just doing freelance stuff. So I did some stuff for Codemasters. They were a big one because we had things like Dizzy, and then when they started breaking into consoles, there were things like Micro Machines and stuff like that. And I was doing a lot of freelance work for Images, who I ended up going in-house with after that when they changed over to call themselves Climax. So yeah, I was there for a very long time, sort of in-house as like the audio person. Yeah,
you describe it as working in-house, but are you working from your own studio with your equipment, or do they provide you with a room? Would you go over to Codemasters and have a studio to work in? How would it work?
No, I mean when I was freelancing originally with just doing Amiga and stuff like that, I was just working from home with just my own stuff. When the consoles started coming in, and the first console work I was doing was with Codemasters, I'd go up there occasionally just to pick out instruments of all things. so I'd write the music independently as sometimes it was just as modules, like just to have the music data, and then I'd go up there to pick the instruments that would go into the tracks, and then the composers and the coder guys that worked at Codemasters would put it all together at that point, because I was just a freelancer. So yeah, but then when I moved over to Climax in-house, I was in-house at that point.
So just talk us through your setup then. Did you have your dream studio at that point? Did they give you everything you needed, or were you a begging musician trying to get everything and anything that you could to work with?
I think back then I just had a really, really sparse setup, and it was mostly machine focused, because like that era of consoles, so we had these, it was after the NES, so we had like the SNES, the Mega Drive, and we had PC stuff, like, so we had the Adlib and the Gravis Ultrasound and things like that, and it was just focusing on having dev kits and just writing music using our own custom stuff.
Did you have any external samplers, like a Kai or something, or did you just do it all within the Amiga through Serial?
Yeah, I just did that. I think I had one sampler, like a really cheap Trilogic one at one point. But yeah, for the early Amiga era, yeah, it was just all in there, really.
Did you ever have a preference between things like the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo and all the different sound chips that these consoles had? Did any of them stand out for you as one you preferred to work on?
I did like the SNES. I'm not a huge fan of FM chips, which is weird because I've recently been doing a lot of coding on the FM expander chip on the 64. But I'm not a huge fan of the sound, I've got to admit on that. So I was more sample based, I think, really. Also the Game Boy, I enjoyed that because when the Game Boy Color came out, obviously it had the same sound chip in it. So so we used our own driver, and I was just writing Game Boy music again, so that was quite fun.
So when you say you're using your own driver, did that provide you with that level of abstraction that it meant your teams could just you could continue to work and just port things over between platforms easily?
Yeah. At that era of that sort of Mega Drive, Game Boy, all those things era, we had a custom tool written for us by one of the programmers that it was like a tracker interface in text, like on a PC, but you could export to, it had like drivers and instrument sets up for all the different consoles. It was like, 7 or 8 of them at least, and the PC as well, both like Gravis and Adlib. So you could do everything within this one tracker.
We're at an era with the Mega Drive, the Super Nintendo, the PC, but you've just said there that you really like to work with the Game Boy. So is there something that you enjoy about working within a more limited spec?
I don't know. It was just refreshing to come back to that, because we'd done some early 90s, and then the late 90s it was just suddenly back again. And then we were obviously, after that, we went on to the Game Boy Advance and the DS and things, and they're all software mixing and samples and stuff. So it's all very different to having like custom, proper little hardware in there.
I think Andrew has a question to ask you now, which will continue schoolboy arguments on the playground.
Yeah, that's right. So on the subject of sampled sounds, and I remember listening to tunes I'd get on public domain discs and magazines, and I'd listen to those on Pro Tracker on the Atari ST, which there was an Amiga version. I think it probably started on the Amiga. So Neil would claim the Atari ST would sound inferior to the Amiga version of Pro Tracker, but from a technical standpoint, is there really much difference when you get into the point that you're just playing samples?
I'd say if we're talking the original ST, yeah, like STFM and stuff like that, it was mostly the playback rate, wasn't it? And being able to mix at a high playback rate versus a CPU. That's how I remember it anyway, because I had... on the ST, I had a chip, like a YM player, but I also had a Digi one that to be honest, we never used it in the game, but I bought it anyway. But that was coded by Griff of Inner Circle, who was like, Inner Circle were quite a big group, weren't they? An English group on the ST. But yeah, he coded that for me, and that played back my specific Amiga music format stuff on there. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's fine. The ST stuff, I used to love Mad Max's tracks and a load of other people. You know, I was not one of those people that was like, oh, the ST's rubbish or anything like that. Because, you know, the stuff you can get out of the YM chip has its own particular sound. It's slightly different to the AY because you've got that CPU grunt behind it, so you can do the extra SID channels and all this other mixing.
There you go. The Amiga Atari debate rages on.
We'll just agree, Neil, that they're just different. They're good in their own way.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I'm quite liking the Spectrum stuff, actually, and I was wondering if you ever played with a Spectrum or kind of made music on it.
I did in the 2000s, weirdly enough, when I'm in a group called 8-Bit, and I'm in another group called Orb, but 8-Bit do, our coder is a very, very big Spectrum coder. Evil Paul, he does Spectrum and PC stuff, but I did a few demos with him, so I had to do like AY stuff on there. Yeah, it's all right. I mean, I like the, as I said, but it's like with the ST, I like the extra stuff you can do, like the buzz tone stuff and things like that, and the frequency stuff you can do there. It's like one of our tracks, I did like a sort of fake speech synth sort of thing on one of the channels, and it's just using the hardware to do it.
I think it must be because of the internet's made it so easy to sort of distribute schematics and technical documentation about these devices now. There's more eyes looking on them and have been able to figure out all sorts of weird sort of features with the hardware, like overflowing registers and tweaking them like that. So it's amazing how it gets better and better.
Yeah, there was a guy not so long ago who reverse engineered the Spectrum's ULA and just wrote an entire book on the reverse engineering of this chip and discovered a load of sort of secrets along the way that, people never knew they could use it in that way. So, yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's like the SID chip stuff with the... It's like some like rolling R&D department on there with with like when they discovered the way to play the samples out of the third channel, like a almost like a PCM thing, but with like really super fast mixing, so you get high quality stuff, and you can also use the filter with samples and so on.
Yeah, I kind of heard that Commodore lost the plans for the SID chip and had to kind of reverse engineer it themselves. So it's amazing that people are still discovering stuff,
I tell you what, there's nothing better, though, than taking old hardware and these new projects where they just sort of bolt in something to the hardware that still keeps the original hardware pure. It sort of fits in with the ethos of the original design, but just boosts it up and makes it sort of modern or sound modern or have fancy graphics. And it just blows me away that these designs of computers that are 30 years old can still be upgraded in this way.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. Yeah, and it's and the pure software ones as well are quite interesting. It's I got an example from one of our coders in Orb called Ultra. I don't know if you've seen the VIC-20 demo, No Pets Allowed. Yeah, it's funny. We were working on that demo, and he was looking at the schematics, and he thought, oh, I think I can make this out of it. And then he went away for a bit and came back, and he had like filled vectors just like rotating all in high res. And it's like, right, I've never seen this before, so this demo might be quite good then. So I mean that's just an example, but it's like when you've got like really super tech, and this guy's amazing coder, and it's like when you've got guys like that and Evil Paul doing stuff, it's just amazing what they come up with.
And you're referencing these coders by their demo scene handles.
Yeah.
But do you come across a lot of them, or did you come across a lot of them in your commercial work? Did those demo scene coders filter into the commercial industry, and did you come across them? And did you know who they were, or did you have to sort of do a secret handshake to figure out who was who?
I don't know. I think people that are demo coders and demo artists and things like that kind of just know of each other, sort of thing, working in the game, especially in the games industry, because obviously high powered, super optimized graphics, and it's going to be a lot of demo coders involved around the place. But yeah, it's always been like that. I think since probably the 64 days. I mean, there were guys there that were doing stuff on CompuNet, and then their games came out on like Firebird and other labels, And then on the Amiga, there were lots of demo coders that went off to do games and form companies as well. Like, the guys that did Pimple Dreams, obviously they formed DICE and, went on from there. And Remedy are another company that were made from demo sceners. And it's the same now, there aren't as many people doing demo scene stuff now, but there's a few guys that work all over the industry doing things.
Would you like to introduce your next tune?
Okay, yeah. So this is a Walkman with a track called Party Invitation 91. The reason I picked this track, it's quite different to all the other tracks on my playlist, but he had like really good like subtlety to his work. It's very different, very mature sounding stuff.
You mentioned the word mature in describing Walkman's work. Could you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by that?
Yeah, there were a few musicians then. I think Fleshbrain was another one as well. They just the composition itself was quite well thought out, but also there was something else going on behind it. There was some sort of subtext in his tracks. I think he had a track. I won't try and say the title because it's in, I think it's Norwegian, so I won't be able to say it properly. But he did a track that was like 10-12 minutes long in I think it's Hunt for 7th of October demo. And when that came out, it pretty much blew everyone away because it had like different sections all in different tempos and all sequenced out, and everything balanced against each other perfectly. So yeah, it was like you'd have demos come in and demos come out, and you just hear certain things that you just go, wow. I mean, Bruno's another one. It's like when him and other Finnish musicians like Dizzy and Heatbeat, when you heard their tracks, it was like, okay, we're on a different level at this point. It's like the standards have gone up.
With other guests, we've talked about the legitimacy of digital music and computer-generated music. Do you feel that Walkman's tracks are the point where it starts to become, inverted commas, real music rather than just, plinky-plonky video game?
I think it would change depending on who you're talking to. I mean, I'm looking at it from a purely like compositional sort of, look. on my side. So what I'm hearing in his stuff there is like, yeah, this is really, you know, well composed, instruments are well chosen, everything's mixed lovely, you know, and so on. So I think it's really going to depend, because, you know, back then, if I'm thinking of that era of 1991, with computers as they were, and, you know, this was all still very niche stuff, and demo scene stuff was super niche then, you know.
There's a YouTube channel called Vin Hetero, I think I've said that right, and he's a very skilled synth player.
Oh, is he the one that does the piano stuff?
He does, and he's taken Mozart and Beethoven and classical tunes, and he plays them in a sort of chiptune style, and they still sound legitimate. You see what I mean? They're still amazing pieces of work. But what's interesting, sometimes he takes video game music and plays it in chips. So if you take something from a Super Nintendo, for example, and you play it in the equivalent of an Amstrad or a Spectrum, yeah, it doesn't sound quite so right.
The way, you know, the amount of money and the amount of time and thought that goes into game soundtracks, like big game soundtracks, and even smaller ones now, really, a lot of this the indie stuff around is amazing. I think is, you know, I think it's definitely legitimate, really.
Did you socialise within the demo scene, because there were demo parties and copy parties and things like that? Did you take yourself out to those, or did you sort of keep yourself to yourself during that period?
No, I've got to admit, no. All that stuff, it just passed me by. It's passed me by now as well. I mean, there's still demo parties, but I just don't. I just don't do it. It's not that I'm like, the demo parties or anything. It's just it's not really something I do.
We've had guests in the past pick tunes, for example, from Rob Hubbard and other composers, and then describe that tune as being from, for example, Rob Hubbard's darker period. Did you have waves of periods? I know you're always working to a brief for whatever game you're working on, but do you have sort of eras in your style of composition, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if I look back at stuff I've done in the early 90s and stuff like that, it's all very musically, it's very, very simple. And I mean, there's bits of melodies I quite like. I mean, there's certain melodies I'm quite happy with there, but there's a naivety to what I was doing. And I think from a mood standpoint, I hadn't really got a lot of that as a thing, you know, actually having a subtext to what you're writing. So yeah, they're all quite naive. But yeah, I think it's just, you know, as you growing as a musician, I think some people are much quicker to get it than others, and I think a lot of my Amiga module stuff is kind of my training wheels for composing and stuff like that, because I don't think, compared to some other musicians, as I said, like guys like Bruno and Heatbeat and so on, it's like they were just on another level entirely. And
you obviously had to collaborate with people to create the games and to create the demos, but in terms of creating the music itself, did you like to collaborate with other composers, or do you prefer to work on your own? Yeah, it's back then I've got most of the time I just work on my own with composition. If it's a big game, obviously that's different, because you have to, you know, you're never going to get it done if you do it on your own. But yeah, mostly I prefer to just work by myself.
Okay, so this tune that you're about to introduce is one of my absolute favourites. So tell us why it's your favourite as well.
Yeah, when I heard this, I'd heard Audiomonster stuff first in the Virtual World demo, where he had like a big classical track at the end that was amazing. It was just like, who's this guy, you know? And then I heard this track in a later demo, and it's just musically, I mean, it goes on for like 13 minutes, and musically it just doesn't get boring. And the file size as well, it's like 128K, it's tiny. You know, it's just one of those things where it's just a file that's technically and musically just great in ways. So yeah.
there's always the danger that if you take something you love doing and you turn it into a day job, that eventually loses its shine. Did you ever have trouble getting out of bed in the morning to face yet more video game music?
Yeah, well, again, that's like any... The thing with writing music for myself and writing music for games, I have a different mindset when I do it. It's not like I'm treating one as a job or anything like that. It's just... Weirdly enough, if I have to write music for myself, like for a demo or something like that, I might have a huge problem getting it done for and spend a month or so just not doing anything. But if I have to do it for a game, it will just get done. And I don't know why it works or it doesn't work, but I just leave it.
If we look at your credits, there's a huge list of games that you've worked on, and some of my favourite games like XCOM UFO. I love that game. And
I got to say on that one, I just did it was conversion work. That wasn't like composing.
That was conversion, was it? Okay.
Yeah, the music's by John Broomhall, I think, on that.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a little question on that, if I may. Then it does sound distinctly different though than the other versions. So, did you have a little bit of license with that?
Well, let me think. So yeah, XCOM. So this is the same time I actually saw the game. So we had the game come in to convert, and I played it and I ran the music through because it's all MIDI stuff. So I ran it through a Gravis, I think, and then I just had to convert it. And we didn't have much space. I remember that we didn't have much space for the music at all. So like the tunes are all under 30k or 50k or something. They're all small. So it was basically me playing a Gravis version and then converting that with, tiny instruments.
In summary, though, you don't really necessarily get to decide too much on the direction on a piece of sort of commissioned music when it's a conversion.
When it's a conversion, no, not so much. It's like, I to be honest, I quite enjoy getting it pretty much the same if I can. I mean, that's not a good example because I didn't. But yeah, it's like if I had an arcade game come in and I just got a tape, then I'd try and get it exactly, sounding as close to the tape as I could within the file size or whatever. So I quite enjoyed that. I guess
it's a challenge in a different way, disassembling a tune and reassembling it within the new limitations.
Yeah, like when we did, I think Theme Park World, we did it on the PlayStation, and the music in that is all on the playing on the chip, whereas like the music in the PC one was on the coming off CD, or it was just loads of tracks, lots and lots of tracks. I remember having so much sound data, and then I had to get it into 256k per world or something, and I had to have like a whole soundtrack playing in that. So things like that, it was quite those kind of technical challenges I quite like.
So I've seen, though, that you've been credited with working on Blizzard's Diablo. So before I go into a question on that, is that correct?
It is correct, but again, it's conversion. It's like they gave us the data, the sound data in the game. We had to do the PlayStation version of the game, and I had to cram as much of the sound into the PlayStation as I could.
Yeah. So before Andrew asks you about any more converted tracks, are there any standout tracks from the PlayStation era that you particularly enjoyed working on, or that were a bit of a challenge and you struggled with?
I don't know. I mean, the PlayStation era is a bit... Oh, I know. SpongeBob.
Okay.
The one... weirdly enough, the THQ one, I think for some reason that and Power Rangers are some of my most popular tracks.
Is the Power Rangers one, does it have the sample that we all want it to have?
The theme tune. I think the theme tune's in there, but I didn't do that. I just did the in-game stuff.
I'm really hitting the nail on the head this week.
Oh, dear.
How hard was it to create an atmosphere going onto like CD audio sound with games from kind of Blizzard and stuff like that?
It was a gradual thing, I think, with a lot of this, because I was, I've worked on, I wouldn't say all of them, but it's like pretty much most of the consoles that came through in the 90s. And, in that 90s era, there were so many consoles that just kind of shifted along. It was every couple of years there'd be something new. There wasn't a longer development cycle. So it was just one of those things where, all right, we're using CD music now. Now you've got to go and, get some modules and, start using sequencers a lot more. And, we're using dialogue. You've got to, go and have this recorded and stuff. So it was just a gradual process for me.
So we're moving through the PlayStation era now, through the 90s and towards the millennium. But in more recent years, you've returned, or in fact rediscovered the C64, a system that you said you didn't really compose a lot for in the first place. So did you keep a hand in on those systems, or is that just a more recent discovery to return to them?
Well, I think the thing was when the when emulators were sort of properly viable on the PC, is I stumbled across a few of those. So I think that got me back into it. But I'd been doing tracker stuff like Fast Tracker on the PC, which is the one I use to still do like chip music stuff now, like the albums and things. But I'd always been doing stuff on that anyway, because it's just, it's just something I do as a hobby. It was at least 20, 30 tracks a year. So I was still knocking stuff out, but it's it's just one of those things where you just go, oh, well, I'm just writing, but it's not going to be in anything. So. Yeah.
Was Fast Tracker 2 the one that had nibbles in it?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I'm really good at nibbles. I mean, Fast Tracker for me, I kept my Amiga until 95, I think, properly, and I was still using bits of it for game work, like not on the Amiga, Amiga game work, but like other consoles that had sample-based stuff you could do, modules on and play them back on there. So, but when I got Fast Tracker 2, it was like, yeah, this is definitely what I should move to, because it wasn't just that it had more channels. It was like the instrument side of it was just such a different thing added to the mix that, I just didn't want to go back to the Amiga after that.
Were you sad to see the end of the Amiga era, though?
I don't know. I think because what I would have been 18 then when I left it. And it was like, it's just one of those things that's like, was a part of my life and I've moved on to something else. So there were so many distractions. I was in a band at the time and doing game stuff. And, it was just like, oh, well, I'm just not doing demos anymore.
Okay, we've got something very special for you in the next segment. But first, why don't you introduce your next track, please, Matt?
Okay, this is a track by Kjell Nordbo. It's called Unlimited Mind. When I came back to the 64 and had a look at stuff and demos in the late 90s, I stumbled across his music discs, and like no one had told me any of this stuff. I just randomly found it, and it was just the most like amazing music I'd heard on a SID chip for years and years. And yeah, the guy was super prolific, and he must have put out over 150 tracks at least.
Matt, owing to your old working relationship with him, we thought it would be fun to ask Judge Drock of Anarchy to put some questions to you. So can you have a listen to these questions from Mark and let us know your thoughts?
Hello everybody, and hello Matt. Long time no speak. Is it really 28 years ago since the year that you joined Anarchy? Well, like all good things, they have to come to an end, but what a great time we had. Okay, I've got a couple of questions I'd like to ask if that's okay. So, a lot of people will remember the great tune to the Commodore 64 game Auf Wiedersehen Monty, which I believe, Matt, you actually made a cover version of at the time. Okay, this tune was made by the great Rob Hubbard and Ben Daglish. Now, what I'd like to ask is, are there any game or demo musicians that you would like to create a similar duet tune with?
As I said before, I don't do a lot of co-op stuff with other people, but in recent years I've done a few things with like Jellica and people like that. So yeah, I think I've worked with the people I want to work with. Really, it's just picking people out.
Another question I'd like to ask is this. Many, many years ago, one of my scene friends, Dr. Awesome from the group The Crusaders, released a physical album on CD with his friend from The Crusaders, Fleshbrain. Just recently, over the last few years, I've been enjoying a lot of your albums, Matt, on digital format, on SoundCloud, downloads and so on. What took you so long? Why did you wait so long to make and release albums under your own name?
Yeah, so the reason that came about was because of the chip scene, the modern chip scene, which is where people are playing live and there are actual gigs with, a group of different chip musicians playing and stuff like that. So I had absolutely no idea about this until probably 2007, I think it was. I had an email from Noel Sleep, who's one of the artists, and he was asking me if I wanted to put a track on a CD that they were making, and so I wrote this track in Fast Tracker and sent it over and stuff like that. But yeah, that introduced me to the whole modern chip scene, which is mostly. It's mostly fixated around Game Boy stuff, but there's other machines used and stuff like that. But it's So from that, when I was seeing them actually releasing EPs and albums like legitimately just as streaming things, I thought I'd have a go myself.
Yeah. I heard that you performed at Blit Festival as well. How was that, and what was your kind of live performance setup?
So 2011, I did that. It was great. It was terrifying, but it was also great because I hadn't played live on a stage since 1995. So I really, really enjoyed it. And this was the thing. It was a total eye opener. Like with the people releasing EPs and albums, it's like it was totally different because obviously with the demo scene and stuff like that, if you released an album in that, it was on a disc and only people with the machine could hear it. So it was great. The setup I had, I've still got it actually, a little notebook, a little HP one, and I was running through there. I'd actually recorded my session out into Audition, and I was playing it through that. With the things that I've been messing about with now, I'm actually using trackers and have special setups for the modules so that I can skip through them, things like that. But a lot of people the Game Boy musicians use this thing called LSDJ, which is it's a tracker, but it's the way it's organized is very much geared towards live play, so they can do a lot more manipulation and things like that. And also people augment their setup, so they don't just have the source hardware. They'll actually have effects and mixers and and whatever. So it's basically like having a dance musician will have like a sequencer that's set up with a lot of stuff primed, but they can also manipulate it.
Okay, I have another question. Back in the late 1980s and the early 1990s, at the height of the Amiga scene, which was the biggest demo scene in the world, did you find any rivalry between yourself and other musicians? Everybody loved format tunes. But how did you feel when it came to other musicians in the scene, or even in the group Anarchy itself?
I don't know. I don't remember any like full-on rivalries or anything like that. You get those some of those demo scene things. You get demos where they're all sort of shouting at each other in the scroll text and stuff. But I can't remember anything from my side. It's, as I said, with a lot of this stuff, I was very hands off on anything outside the demos. I'm one of those people that for the demo scene, I was just quite fixated on making tracks and watching demos, and that was it. And the other thing with that era is you got to remember we're all like 17, 18 years old, so
Okay, my last question is quite a poignant one. Now, looking back to the early 1990s when Anarchy, the demo group, came to an end after a fantastically successful 5-year run. Amazing as it was, I still have a few regrets about that time. The first one is having to give up and lose friends along the way because they couldn't keep up with the rise of the success of the group. Secondly, I regret killing the group before Creator had chance to finish what could have been his magnum opus demo. That was Delusions of Reality. And thirdly, my final regret is never being able to give Format the music disc he deserved from Anarchy. And for that, I apologise. Do you have any regrets, Matt, about your time in the demo scene?
No, I've got quite a positive view on it. I think because it was a transitional period for me to get into games and things like that. It's without the Amiga, I'd never have had the opportunity to get into game audio, and that was the stepping stone for me to do it. So I have no regrets with it at all. The demo scene. The thing with it for me is that it was such an important way to get your work out there, because obviously now with YouTube and and everything else, there's so many avenues for getting your work heard or seen or whatever. And for computer stuff then, there was hardly anything. It's crazy when you think about it. It's it had to be real time, it had to be on a media that worked on the machine, and so I think we're incredibly lucky to be in that sort of era.
You said you left Anarchy in 91. I
Yes.
can't remember where that ties in with when Anarchy ended. Were you there till the end of Anarchy?
No, so I left in 91, then I came back for a little bit in 92, but I think Drock finished it in 93, was it? Start of 93?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I was... The thing with the 92 thing was that I left, and I also, I think at the time I moved as well, so I just completely, got it out of my life in one go, sort of thing. It was like, that's the end of that, I'm off, So I didn't hear anything about Amiga demos or groups or whatever happened until, late 90s it would have been.
Well, you've heard the questions there from Drock. Did you have any message you wanted to send back to him before we go on to the next track?
Yeah, I'll just say hello, really. I mean, I've got him on Twitter. We've talked on there, and I think I wrote when he was doing an article about the demo scene for something, I wrote a little bit in there. So yeah, it's nice to see he's up, he's around doing stuff. It's the thing with like Twitter and Facebook is that all these old guys like me are still around doing something or other. So it's great, it's great to see what people are doing.
He spoke very fondly of that period. So I think he's got a lot of good memories of the demo scene days. And yeah,
exactly. I mean, it's like for a creative outlet, it was great. It was really, really good. Yeah, it's funny to hear his voice again, because you remember it from his phone calls in the in the scene. So yeah, it's like, oh yeah, I remember this guy.
Would you like to introduce your ultimate tune?
Yeah, okay, so this one's a bit different. This is from the more modern era of the chip scene. This is Cats with Pool Hall. So there used to be a website called 8-Bit Collective that you could upload your songs there, basically, and have them reviewed and people talking about, all these different elements of the new chip scene sort of thing. So it's gone now, unfortunately, but there were a lot of good tracks there.
also published 10 albums, at least that's what I've found. It may be more, with the last issued in 2014. Talk us through some of these albums then, because is this separate from your game creation? These aren't albums of game music, are they? This is your own original creations?
Yes. So this is definitely being part of the new chip scene stuff. It was because people were doing EPs and albums and putting them out as streaming media. I thought I'd have a go at it myself. So I did Decades, which was the first one, which that went down quite well. And then at the time, I was taking some time off from the game industry, so I had quite a lot of free time. I was doing like my own stuff, and so I did that, and then I did Surrender pretty much 6 months afterwards. And Surrender's my favourite one of the ones I've done, and that was in 2012. No, hang on, that was in 2011. That was So. It's just a different way of working. I do all my stuff still in Fast Tracker 2, all the stuff for that. It's occasionally I'll augment it with something else. Like I might use the sequencer to do this and that in it. But most of the time, the majority of them are just I export them directly out of Fast Tracker, and then I might put a mastering plugin on the end just to, because if you're putting it out as a streaming track, you might as well just make it sound a little bit, nice. As opposed to just like, a horrible track which you can't really mix outside of the volumes. So, so it's just something that's that I kind of got into, and some people have liked what I've done, so I've just kept doing them.
You put these out under the format name, do you, or do you use a different name?
Yeah, because when they asked me to do that track for the chip scene stuff, they knew me from my module stuff, so yeah, I just kept the same name.
Yeah. And are these released on physical formats, or is this digital releases?
It's all digital releases. It's the physical formats thing is like, it'd be nice to do it, but I just never have the time. And it's one of those things where you have to manage inventory and, get things pressed. And I'm like, I can just put it on Bandcamp and, go away and it's just done.
And you say you use Fast Tracker 2 still to create these albums. I was listening to one of them earlier while I was working, and I had no idea that you used Fast Tracker to create this work. Why is it that you use Fast Tracker? When there are so many other options, like modern options, like
Reaper or something like that. Yeah. I use Reaper for my commercial work, and stuff like that. It's a superb sequencer. It's absolutely brilliant. But the thing, I think the format stuff has an aesthetic to it, and it has a sort of directive to it. Over the years, if there's anything that it is, it's music that's done in a tracker that's playing in real time, at that point, and it's just the track, and that's what you get out the other end, more or less, So I think that's what it is. It's like it'd feel weird if I just started using a sequencer to do it. I think it wouldn't feel like a format thing.
Yeah. It's almost like you take on a character when you're working in that sort of in that format name,
Yeah.
You put on that costume.
Exactly, and it comes back to the thing I was saying about sound drivers and composers having that sort of symbiotic relationship, because your Fast Tracker sounds, there's something about the sound of it, especially with the instruments, that is something I really enjoy. And you can do weird stuff in the tracker, like you can oversaturate the mixer, to get a slight distortion on things that's just in there. And I really like it.
I think sometimes it's also a case of a tool that you're very familiar with allows you to express yourself easily. So anything that reduces the friction from what's in your mind to actually creating that content is something that's beneficial.
Yeah, I think there's some of that. I mean, the thing with a tracker compared to... I had this when I did a conversation with a composer friend of mine that works in the industry. It's a thing I said to him is like, a tracker is so precise. You can get such intricate stuff if you're bothered to sit there and program it. You can get really super... I was saying to him, like when those sort of glitch drums were quite popular like 10, 15 years ago, it was... I never did those in a sequencer. I always used to do them in a tracker and then export that track into the sequencer, because it was like the easiest way for me to make this is just using this. It's like I'm not going to sit there doing MIDI events and pushing stuff to do it. It's like I can just use a sequencer to do it.
Am I right in understanding that you worked on an indie game yourself, which featured sort of 3D graphics and needed 3D glasses? Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, that was Depth, wasn't it? Yeah, I was working on that, and then I stopped working on it.
That's why it's so hard to find.
Yeah. It was like quite a nice idea, but the thing was, I was working on that, and then I got a proper in-house job again straight after, sort of a few months into development or something like that. So I just went off and did that for 3 years.
What was the idea behind it? What was the pitch?
It was a shoot 'em up that was with depth, so that you would actually use the depth element to actually have different layers and things like that. And also with, if I remember rightly, there were bits of it where it was much easier to see where things were because of the depth element. I'm not selling it very well, but
no,
yeah.
but I mean, it's interesting to sort of discuss sort of a little bit about the coding side, because that's obviously something that you've had to deep dive into. So, was the framework you were using, was that producing the anaglyphometry automatically, or did you actually have to learn about it?
I mean, I think that one was written in Blitz. Blitz Basic, like.
I loved Blitz Basic. That was a great language.
Yeah, it's one of those things where when I'm writing tools for myself for like 8-bit computer stuff, I use Blitz to write them, like graphic converters and things like that. I'll just knock it out in Blitz, and because it's one of those things where you can just load it up, and because it's got all the API in there, you just go, all right, I've just got to write this in 10 minutes. Yeah,
DirectX all built in, isn't it? Yeah, you don't need to worry about any of that.
But it's very much what we were talking about earlier about that sort of reducing the friction for your creativity. So whatever the tool that you're most familiar with, you'll use.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a weird choice. I mean, a lot of people use Python and things like that to do those kind of things, but I'm just one of those people that will just, if I need to write a graphics converter quickly, I will just write it in Blitz and then port the output into Unity and then sit there writing in C# for the rest of the game. So, yeah.
Matthew, you now have 2 important decisions to make before we leave you on Retro Island. You can pick only one of the 8 tracks you've shared with us today to keep you company. Which will it be?
Let's go with the Audiomonster one. It's got a lot of different sections in it as well, so whatever mood you're in, there's a bit in there for you.
It's almost cheating.
Now, ordinarily at this point, we'd ask you to pick a game or application to keep with you on Retro Island, but I'm going to bend the rules a bit, and I'm going to ask you to pick a music chip from any system that you'd like to have with you on Retro Island.
I'm going to have to pick the SID chip, I'm afraid.
Too easy, wasn't it, really?
Yeah. Well, it's just that there's so much in it. There's so much in there that's still being discovered, There's so much stuff, so...
You've made your choices, Matthew, and I hope they serve you well in your survival on Retro Island. Thank you so much for sharing your fascinating history with us today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Matt. And if you've enjoyed the show today, why not take a moment to check out our other podcast episodes or find more retro goodness on my YouTube channel, RetroManCave.
And you can find me on the YouTube channel BackOfficeShow, to which you'll find links in the show notes, as well as links to Matthew's choices and YouTube channel Art of Video Game.
And you can catch me, Ravi Abbot, every week on the Retro Hour and on the 8-Bit Mix. And I'll be doing a live DJ mix using Amigas soon.
Thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye!